Full-size pickup trucks are obviously big business in America, and with every generation, those pickup trucks become more and more capable. And that's why you might consider shopping for something like the Chevy Colorado that's right next to me. Depending on who you ask, the Colorado, the Tacoma, the upcoming Ford Ranger, and the Honda Ridgeline are either compact or mid-sized pickup trucks. But the truth of the matter is that this is actually a little bit closer to the Silverado than some of those compact pickup trucks you might be thinking of from the 1980s. So in many ways, you can think of this as sort of an 8/10 or a 9/10 version of a Chevy Silverado. This is a smaller truck that tows, handles, and off-roads with the big boys, but is a little bit easier to park. As we dive into the Colorado, you'll probably notice that there are a few convenient features that we find in full-size trucks that we don't really find in any of the smaller trucks in America. That seems to be because they receive a little bit less attention from shoppers and from designers alike. But I will tell you in advance that the Colorado and actually the Honda Ridgeline are two of my favorite trucks in America. And if I were shopping in this segment, those two vehicles would be my two top picks. And of course, the last thing to remember as we continue is that the price tag on a mid-size truck is not necessarily that much lower than a full-size truck. The Colorado model we were able to get our hands on for this review is the all-new Zr2 model. This is the off-road intended Colorado. And that's why the bumper in this vehicle looks a little bit different than the rest of the Colorado lineup, because this is targeted at off-road performance. So we have better approach and departure angles in this vehicle, and you notice we have these cutouts right here in front of the front tires that helps you climb over larger obstacles. And most importantly, this is actually about 3.5 inches wider than a regular Colorado. That's really noticeable when you take a look at the way the fenders bulge out on each side. In this video, I will obviously be talking about the Zr2, but I'll actually be spending most of my time on the regular Colorado. So before we dive into that, let's talk about what the Zr2 package buys you. We get the wider track that I mentioned earlier, and of course the wider body. But instead of just giving us spacers or different wheels on this vehicle, they've actually given us different axles. So this is not a minor tweak to the Colorado. Think of this as sort of the mid-size Ford Raptor. Chevy didn't make quite as many changes to the Colorado to create the Zr2 as Ford did with the F-150 to create the Raptor, but I think the parallel still works because this is a little bit less expensive and of course it's smaller. So again, think of it as a scaled down Raptor. We get new suspension components in this vehicle. We also get a unique spool valve damper system with remote reservoirs front and rear. Spool valves and dampers are kind of an interesting innovation. It's quite an expensive component to be putting on a stock vehicle like this, and generally speaking, we've seen them mainly in performance track-oriented vehicles. If you want to know more about them, I'm sure you can dig around online, so I won't waste too much time in this video about that. The Zr2 also gets unique front and rear bumpers, again, to help with the approach, departure angles, etc. We get a lot of skid plates going on under the vehicle to help sensitive components, and we get a 2-inch lift, which gives us 8.9 inches of ground clearance. You'll notice that is less than something like a Wrangler, but actually this is fairly good as far as pickup trucks go. And remember, this is a little bit more compact than something like a Ram Power Wagon. The Colorado is available with 2 different bed lengths and 2 different cabs, and those mix and match into 3 different combinations. We have the extended cab with a 6'2" box, this crew cab with a 5'2" box, or a 6'2" box behind it. You'll notice that there is one classic bed and cab combination that's missing from the Colorado. There is no 2- or 3-seat version of the Colorado because all of them have at least an extended cab behind that front seat row. And that means that the Colorado is not really that much shorter than a Silverado. The primary difference is the way the bed is designed. The Colorado uses a 5'2" bed, not a 5'8" bed like the Silverado, or a 6'2" bed, not a 6'6" bed like we see in the Silverado. The bed length really accounts for the majority of the size discrepancy between this and Chevy's larger pickup trucks, because this is really only about 3 to 4 inches shorter than many half-ton trucks. And if you get a half-ton truck with a regular cab and a shorter bed in the back, it may actually be shorter than the shortest version of the Colorado. That's why some people are a little bit surprised by how long the Colorado actually is, because the shortest version of the Colorado is still longer than many minivans in America, and the Colorado that we're driving right here manages to be longer than a Chevy Tahoe. Moving to the rear, we have tail lamp modules that are just on the body of the vehicle, as is pretty typical with the pickup truck. And you'll notice back here that the Colorado is a little bit narrower than a Silverado or the average half-ton truck in America. And that really is one of the key differences between this and the larger trucks. Even though this is about 3.5 inches wider than a regular Colorado, it's still narrower than a lot of half-ton trucks in America. The narrower body and the design that's a little bit closer to the ground help make this a little bit more convenient to park. If we drop the tailgate, which is damped by the way, so that way it doesn't slam right there at the bottom, and it's pretty easy to open and close, we find a cargo area that is still able to accommodate 4 4-foot wide goods in the back. And that really is why this is not that much smaller than the average half-ton truck. Pickup trucks, cargo vans, and generally speaking minivans in America are all designed to accommodate things that are 4 feet wide in the back. And therefore you can't really shrink the truck too much without it being less practical. And that's why we see a width that is not that far off those larger trucks. As you'd expect out of a smaller truck, we have smaller engines under this hood. Things start with a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder direct injection engine that produces 200 horsepower and 191 pound-feet of torque. It's mated to a 6-speed manual by default, or you can get a 6-speed automatic, and of course 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive. Then we have a 3.6-liter direct injection V6 that produces 308 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque, making it at the moment the most powerful engine in this particular segment. In a nice touch, that engine now features cylinder deactivation, which is something that we got after the Colorado initially launched in America. That engine is also mated to a slightly different transmission. It's one of General Motors' 8-speed units that we also see in their larger trucks. Then we have this engine right here, which is quite unique in this segment. It's a 2.8-liter turbo diesel 4-cylinder engine. This produces 181 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. This is mated only to a 6-speed automatic transmission, which I think is a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to have seen this mated to GM's 8-speed automatic. Logically, that means if you're shopping for a diesel pickup truck in America, this is one of the few options you have, because Ram has been selling their turbo diesel in their Ram 1500 for a while. It actually ends up being a little bit less expensive than some trims of the Colorado, but we aren't sure whether that engine will continue into 2019 yet. They've not announced it yet on their pickup truck line. At the moment, that means this is one of the very few diesel engines you can find in a pickup truck, although we do expect to see one under the hood of the Silverado and probably the Ford F-150 coming soon. It's also worth noting that although Ram has announced the diesel will return for their 2019 model year in their pickup trucks, they haven't announced it yet, so we don't know when that will happen. And if you want a diesel right now in a newer pickup truck, this may be your only option, depending on when you're watching this. Logically, the diesel engine is going to give you the best fuel economy in the Colorado, and you can get up to 30 miles per gallon on the highway. Most shoppers, however, will average between 19 and 22 miles per gallon combined, depending on which gasoline engine and transmission you get under the hood. Now, it's worth noting that the ZR1 that we're driving here has fuel economy that is considerably lower than average, even for this particular segment, and even considering that the model we're driving has the Duramax 2.8. According to the EPA, the model that we're driving right here should average 19 city, 22 highway, and 20 combined, and we've been getting a little bit below that. Of course, that has to do mainly with the overall design of the ZR2, because if you get the other versions of this truck with the diesel engine, then you should get in the high 20s in terms of overall fuel economy. But this particular model, because of the changes to the body, the changes to the drivetrain, etc., and of course the tire choice, mean that that fuel economy really will lower. The race to build more and more capable pickup trucks is not limited to just the half-ton segment. It has also affected vehicles like the Colorado. When properly equipped, this will tow up to 7,700 pounds with the diesel engine, 7,000 pounds with the gasoline V6, and a modest 3,500 pounds with the 4-cylinder base engine. That not only compares fairly well to modern half-ton pickup trucks, but it compares especially well to an older pickup truck that you might want to replace with a Colorado. For instance, a 2005 Chevy Silverado V8 had tow ratings as low as 5,500 pounds, so this could actually be an upgrade in terms of overall capability. Payload capacity is also quite generous, so the days of these being quarter-ton pickup trucks with a 500-pound payload really are long gone. You can put 1,492 pounds or 1,574 pounds, which is 3/4 of a ton, right back here in the bed of your Colorado. That's quite similar to the Honda Ridgeline, and depending on how you've equipped your Tacoma, this could be a few hundred pounds more or perhaps about 100 pounds less. The model that we're driving has a partial power driver's seat, so we can move the seat forward and backward using the powered controls. We can also move the seat up and down, but you can't change the seat bottom cushion angle. We do have a powered 2-way adjustable lumbar support, but the recline is manual. There's also a tilt telescopic steering column to allow shorter and taller drivers to find an ideal driving position. Overall, I'm going to give this seat 8 out of 10 points. I think this is a little bit below the Honda Ridgeline in terms of overall seat comfort. I really did find those seats quite comfortable, but this is definitely ahead of the Toyota Tacoma. The big difference between this and the Toyota is the overall seating position. This feels more like a modern pickup truck or perhaps a modern crossover or other utility vehicle. And I can actually raise this seat quite far off the ground to make it a little bit more upright if I want to, and that's not something you can do in the Tacoma. In the Tacoma, for some reason, it feels like you're sitting with your legs practically straight out in front of you and your arms as well, because the cab is actually quite short. The floor is quite high, and that seat really sits quite close to the ground. As with the front seats, I find the back seats to be a little less comfortable than a Honda Ridgeline, but more comfortable than a Toyota Tacoma. I still have a generous amount of legroom right here behind myself, about 3 inches there, and a decent amount of headroom as well. It's about an inch left, even if I sit very upright back here. If I move to the middle seat, the hump is relatively small for a pickup truck, which is a nice touch, and my head does touch the ceiling because of the overall shape of the seat itself and the ceiling. And if I move over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat is all the way back in its tracks. I had a 6'5" person sitting right there, and my knees are just barely touching the seat back. Obviously, in terms of overall size, this cab is a little bit shorter than the larger cabs that we find in the half-ton segment, but the biggest difference actually is width, because it's a little bit tighter back here if you want to put 3 adults across the rear bench. One of the other areas of difference is overall storage practicality back here. You can fold the seat backs forward, so you can have a flat cargo area there, right there on top of the seat, and you can lift the seat bottom cushion up. But when you do fold those up, you'll realize that the Colorado's floor is not completely flat like we do find in some half-ton pickup trucks. And that means that the storage area is just not as convenient as some of those larger vehicles. Chevy wanted to make the Colorado a little bit closer to the ground. That makes it easier for shorter people to get into and out of the vehicle. And that's one of the reasons that we don't find a completely flat floor, because some of the components that would normally be completely under the frame of a half-ton truck are actually positioned a little bit higher relatively in this vehicle, more like we see in the average crossover or SUV. As we look around the inside, keep in mind that we are in the Zr2 off-road version. We have height adjustable seatbelts for the driver and the front passenger, and we have a Zr2 logo embroidered right there onto the front seat headrests. The model that we're driving has the optional leather upholstery. We don't have too much bolstering going on there on the seat bottom or seat back cushion, and the front doors are made mainly from hard touch plastics, which is pretty common in more utilitarian vehicles. We do, however, have a soft touch armrest section right there on the back. Unlike larger pickup trucks, the front door pockets are quite small, and there are 2 of them. There's one right there under that grab handle on the door, and then we find another one below that, but it's a little bit hard to stuff things like junk mail or small magazines that have been rolled up down there like you would be able to in larger vehicles. If we move on over to the dashboard, we find more hard touch plastics going on for the upper section of the dashboard as well as the lower section. The glove compartment features a bin design. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside, but smaller ones will definitely fit. As we move from the passenger side on over to the driver's side, those hard plastics continue. The model that we're driving has the optional touchscreen infotainment and navigation system. This features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration, as you can see right there. Below the screen, we have a few physical buttons like the power button, direct access to radio, media, tone settings, home button, track forward, backward, and a menu button. Below those controls, we find the single zone automatic climate control, and then working our way down, we have a row of buttons where we find things like the traction control disable button, button to turn on and off the front and rear locking differentials right over there, hazard light button, a button for the tow mode and exhaust brake, hill descent control, and a button to turn on and off the cargo bed light. Below that, we find the controls for the front heated seats. Below those controls, we have single USB input, a 12-volt power port, and a small cubby. The shifter is a pretty traditional console shifter. We have drive and then low 1 notch behind that. The button to change gears is right back here on the back, and then on the side we have plus-minus buttons. The plus-minus buttons are used in coordination with the low mode to limit the top gear that the transmission will use. Next to the shifter, we have 2 large cup holders, and then we have a wireless charging mat behind there that can barely fit larger smartphones like this, even when the cable is not connected. It's mainly due to the case. However, that would be a tight squeeze even if I didn't have one. Working our way back from there, we have a soft touch center armrest. This opens to reveal a moderately sized storage cubby. This is definitely smaller than we find in large pickup trucks in America. You can just see the overall dimensions here. This is really where we lose space versus the average half-ton truck. The instrument cluster features a large tachometer on the left, large speedometer on the right, and a few more fixed gauges up top. Then we have a color multifunction display in the middle. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design with some small sport grips up top. You'll find the cruise control buttons over here on the left, and the buttons that control that multifunction display over here on the right. This is also where you'll find a phone button and a voice command button. You'll notice that on the front of the steering wheel, we don't have track forward or backward or volume up down. That's because they're on the back of the steering wheel, as we see in some of GM's other vehicles. We have track up and down on the left, volume up and down on the back of the wheel over here on the right. To the left of the steering wheel, we find the integrated trailer brake controller. This really is a great feature. I'm glad that Chevy decided to put this on the Colorado. I wish more compact pickup trucks and even utility vehicles had integrated trailer brake controllers, at least as an option. You adjust the gain with these buttons right here and activate the brakes with that slider. Then below that, we have the control for that four-wheel drive system. We have two-wheel drive, auto, 4 high, 4 low, and then an off-road mode by pressing that button right there in the middle. Now, fortunately, I recently had the opportunity to drive the Zr2 off-road, interestingly enough, at a Land Rover Experience Center, where it was a course set up for the full-on Range Rovers and Jeep Wranglers that were also in attendance. And this vehicle did impressively well. Ground clearance is not quite as high on the Zr2 as it is in some Jeep models, especially the ones with available adaptive air suspension systems, but the Colorado had absolutely no problem going through any of the obstacles that were there. Generally with pickup trucks, the bigger trouble is the breakover angle, and that has more to do with the length of the vehicle and the overall wheelbase when you compare this to something like a Jeep Wrangler. Thanks to the standard off-road tires in the Colorado, traction is absolutely not a problem. And of course, if you need more traction, we do have those locking differentials, both front and rear, and the low ratio gear mode. Interestingly enough, that puts the Colorado in a very unique category because not many vehicles in America are equipped with front locking differentials. This one is quite handy because, of course, you don't have to get out of the vehicle like you did in older vehicles with manual locking differentials. We just hit that little button right there and it's engaged. To help improve handling in higher speed situations, the lockers will also automatically disengage over a certain speed. In our acceleration test, the model that we're driving ran from 0 to 60 in 9.4 seconds. This is definitely on the slow side for the mid-size pickup truck segment. Because of the changes that Chevy made to the Colorado in order to make the Zr2, this is actually slower 0 to 60 than the other Colorados that you'll find on the dealer lot. Now, if you get the 3.6 liter V6 engine, then this will go from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. That's the number we got from a Colorado with 3.6 liter V6 and rear wheel drive that was provided to us by a local dealer for competitive testing. That's notably faster than the Toyota Tacoma with the V6. It's actually about half a second faster than the Honda Ridgeline as well. The off-road focused mission of the Zr2 also affects the braking, and this took 131 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0, which is a little on the long side, even if you were to include competitive half-ton pickup trucks. Now, on the 3.6 liter V6 model that we borrowed from the local dealer, that model stopped in 120 feet, which is a little bit shorter than your average half-ton truck. So keep in mind, if you want the off-road ability of the Zr2, you have to be willing to give up a few things for that. Obviously, one of the trade-offs is handling. This is not going to handle quite as well as a regular Colorado without the off-road package. However, here I think that General Motors has struck an excellent balance between handling ability and off-road ability as well, because this really is the kind of vehicle that you can drive like a normal truck and it handles fairly well, all things considered. I'm going to give this a B overall in this particular segment, but you can also take off-roading on the weekends, or you can take home and you can use it to work on your farm or on your ranch, or tow a trailer, or just haul your family around because we do have that large back seat. In terms of overall handling ability, the Honda Ridgeline really is the winner in this segment because it's a unibody truck. It's basically a Honda Pilot with a bed grafted on the back. It's also worth noting that the Ridgeline has a very unique feature. It has a torque vectoring rear axle because it basically borrows Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system. So while it is primarily a front-wheel drive vehicle in steady-state highway driving, when you get on a winding road like this, it will actually send more power to a single rear wheel than to the front wheels under certain circumstances, and that really helps the Ridgeline feel sportier out on the road. Because of the needs for off-roading, off-road oriented pickup trucks can sometimes have more of a bouncy ride and sometimes also be somewhat firmer than the average pickup truck. But the Zr2 is actually an incredibly good balance, I think. You can likely thank those unique dampers that we find on the Zr2 for that, and also probably the fact that this is a little bit smaller than the average half-ton pickup truck and therefore it weighs a little bit less. In terms of overall ride comparisons, this compares very well to the Toyota Tacoma. Again, that has a very similar mission in mind, but both of these vehicles deliver slightly poorer rides than what we find in the Honda Ridgeline, because that is designed to be more of an on-road focused vehicle. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we scored 73.5 decibels in this cabin. You can thank the off-road tires as well as the diesel engine for that, because in the 3.6 liter V6 model we borrowed from the dealer, this scored 71 decibels, which is notably quieter. Because mid-sized pickup trucks like this are not necessarily that much smaller or that much less capable than the half-ton pickup trucks that would be about the same overall size, you shouldn't expect extremely high fuel economy out of this bunch. The The diesel available in the Colorado is kind of an interesting option, however, because if you get this in most versions of the Colorado, then you will get really excellent fuel economy, much better than you'll get in the average half-ton truck. Very, very similar to what we see in the Ram 1500 EcoDiesel. I actually think this is a little bit better in your average daily driving cycle, however. But if you get the Zr2, then fuel economy drops quite a bit. We have been averaging 18.5 miles per gallon, and this is the most efficient diesel version of the Zr2. If you get the V6, then you should expect those fuel economy numbers to be even lower. The reason for that, obviously, as I said before, is all the changes that Chevy made to this pickup truck in order to make it off-road capable. We have an awful lot of extra weight in the vehicle, it's not as aerodynamic. The tires and a number of other things that they put on the Zr2 obviously create drag and lower efficiency. Therefore, when it comes to overall fuel economy, I'm going to have to give this particular model a D, but if you get other versions of the Colorado with the 2.8 liter engine or the 3.6 liter V6, then I would say the Colorado deserves a solid B. You will find slightly higher fuel economy in the high fuel economy trims of, for instance, the Ram 1500 or the high efficiency versions of the Ford F-150, but those will cost more than the Colorado. For 2018, Chevy's Colorado starts at $20,200. That is significantly less expensive than the base price of the Chevy Silverado. It's about $7,500 lower. But remember that you're not really getting the same sort of thing in a smaller package. The Colorado gets a 4-cylinder engine and a 6-speed manual. That puts a more or less comparably equipped base Colorado V6 only $2,000 less than the Silverado with the V6. The key takeaway here is that the Colorado is not just an 8 or 9/10 scale Silverado in terms of overall size, it is also an 8 or 9/10 Silverado in terms of overall price, because when you start trying to comparably equip the models, they don't really end up that far off. And of course, if you want a diesel Colorado, you're going to have to be willing to pay $35,785 starting, which is actually about $4,000 more than the least expensive 2017 Ram 1500 EcoDiesel. The EcoDiesel took 2018 off in the Ram lineup and it will be back for the 2019 model year, but we don't know how much it's going to cost you. As with other small pickup trucks in America, the base model is pretty basic, but there are a few touches that I appreciate, especially when you start looking at the competition. We get a 7-inch infotainment system in even the base Colorado, which gives you Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We also have a partial power driver seat, and General Motors' base engine is much more modern than the base engines we see in the Frontier or the Tacoma. We also get a 6-speed manual transmission, not a 5-speed manual transmission or a 5-speed automatic like we find in some of the competition. Before we move on, let's talk about the Zr2 model, which is again the one that we were driving this week. It's the off-road focused Colorado. In a way, you can look at the off-road dedicated pickup truck segment as being split 3 ways. We have the Colorado, which has more significant modifications really than we find in the Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro. It is a little bit closer to what we see in the Ford Raptor. Then we have the full-size Ford Raptor sort of in the middle. And then if you want something that's built off of a bigger, beefier frame, then you could get the Ram Power Wagon in the 3/4 ton segment. So it appears that the 3 manufacturers are tackling their off-road dedicated vehicle slightly differently in this way. Although we do expect to see a Ford Ranger-based Raptor at some point in the future, likely with about as much modification as we're seeing in the Zr2. The Zr2 has that different body, it has the wider track to give you better off-road ability. We get the standard off-road tires, we get that very unique front bumper, which really does help improve off-road ability. And then of course we get all the usual off-road things like skid plates, locking differentials, etc. When you look at what went on to create the Zr2 from the Z71 pickup truck, you'll see that the Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro is not quite the same thing, because there aren't as many significant substantive changes in order to turn the other Tacomas into the TRD Pro. Now despite that, the TRD Pro is actually a little bit more expensive. The Tacoma does have Toyota's latest active safety systems, but in other areas it comes behind the Colorado. Most notably, we get a 6-speed automatic, not the 8-speed automatic, and there's no diesel option in that truck. So if you really want that extra stump-pulling torque that we see in the Colorado, you won't be able to find that in the Toyota. What really impressed me about the Zr2 is how livable it is for daily driving, despite being so obviously focused on factory off-road performance. The TRD Pro and the Raptor are much more compromised in this respect. They're far more removed from the other models in terms of daily driving livableness. I really like the 2.8 liter diesel engine because I really like diesels, period. However, I have to say that if I were shopping, I would get the Zr2 with the V6 because the diesel fuel economy is not that much better than the V6, and it's a $3,000 option. We do get that extra torque, but you have to give up the 8-speed automatic transmission and the higher horsepower. So the V6 is going to get you from 0 to 60 faster. You should also know that towing on the Zr2 is limited to 5,000 pounds maximum because of the other changes to make it more off-road capable. And that means that the diesel engine does not get you that bump in towing capacity that we see in the Z71 trim. Now let's move on to the competition. Nissan's Frontier is our first competitor, and it is very inexpensive. It starts just under $19,000. And there seem to be plenty of deals going on for that Frontier. Of course, the reason it's so inexpensive is because it's getting pretty old. And that's why we see less power out of the engines, older 5-speed manual transmissions, 5-speed automatics, relatively low fuel economy, and an interior that definitely feels old. The interior of that Nissan really feels like it's from an entirely different era because of how old it is. Now, the Frontier has proved relatively reliable, but I think on all fronts it just comes below the Colorado. And if I were shopping for a pickup truck in this segment, even if I were looking at the bottom end of the food chain, I would still buy the base Colorado over the Frontier. The fuel economy is better, the engine is more modern, the transmission's more modern, etc. And we get that standard infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you effectively have navigation if you have a compatible smartphone. That's definitely the option that I would get. Next up, we have the Toyota Tacoma, which is really the 800-pound gorilla in this segment. The Toyota Tacoma outsells the Colorado by about 2 to 1 in America right now. But to be perfectly honest, this sales balance has always confused me because I think the Colorado is quite simply the better truck. The Colorado is more comfortable, it's more efficient, it's more modern, I think it's better priced, and especially if you want a basic truck, it will cost you $5,000 less than a base Tacoma. Now, I do wish that Chevy would push their latest active safety tech into the Colorado because the inclusion of that in the 2018 Tacoma is a pretty big deal when it comes to safety and when it comes to value. Of course, Toyota has always sold the Tacoma on its legendary reliability, but interestingly enough, if you look at the 2017 reliability ratings, both Consumer Reports and J.D. Power have actually rated it below the Colorado. So if you're looking for a tough, durable, reliable pickup truck, it looks like the Colorado may actually be the one to choose for 2018. Of course, for me, the rest of the package matters a little bit more than a slight variance in reliability. And that's again where the Colorado shines, because we have excellent towing capacity, the interior is much more comfortable than the Tacoma I found, and we have gadgets that are definitely more modern, again with the exception of that active safety tech. So I would say until Toyota gives the Tacoma a more serious redesign, the Chevy quite simply has it beat. For the moment, I'm skipping the Ford Ranger because it's not available in the US yet. Now hopefully we will be able to get our hands on it soon, so expect a full review coming sometime this year. That takes us on over to the Honda Ridgeline. The Ridgeline is the most expensive in this bunch, starting at $29,990. But it's actually a fairly good value when you start to dig below the surface. The chasm between these base prices is because the Honda starts with a V6, keyless entry and keyless start, and of course the bigger cab that we don't find in the base Colorado. Now even when accounting for that, it's still going to be about $1,000 more expensive than a comparably equipped Colorado, but then you have to factor in some of the other things that we get in the Ridgeline that we don't find in the average truck in this segment. We find more comfortable seats, we find a variety of practical cargo solutions like the in-bed trunk, and of course the tailgate that moves in some different directions as well. In addition to that, the Ridgeline also gets 10% better fuel economy than the Colorado. That's a fairly big deal in this segment. Well, the Colorado is more of a scaled-down Silverado. Honda uses a torque vectoring rear axle and that fully independent rear suspension I mentioned before, and wider, more crossover-styled tires. The result is that the Ridgeline is more fun to drive, it's more car-like out on the road, it definitely handles better, and that torque vectoring rear axle makes a big difference if you want to start corner carving in your truck. But on the downside, the Ridgeline is not as capable off-road, and its tow rating is not as high. It's limited to 5,000 pounds, which is right where your average crossover is. My top two picks in this segment are the Ridgeline and the Colorado for very different reasons. The Colorado is a scaled-down traditional truck. It has a durable frame, a traditional four-wheel drive system, available front and rear locking differentials, high tow ratings, etc. It's a practical replacement for an F-150, a Silverado, or a Ram if you want something that is just as capable but packaged in a slightly smaller wrapper. The Ridgeline, on the other hand, is a pretty perfect blend of crossover and pickup truck. You can haul just as much stuff in the bed. The payload ratings are actually fairly good in the Ridgeline. But it's more comfortable to drive on your daily commute, it's more fun to drive when the road starts to curve, but on the downside, it's less capable at traditional truck things like towing, off-roading, etc. But for the majority of shoppers, it will deliver exactly what you need out of a truck. Now, if I were shopping for a smaller pickup truck at this exact moment, it would be a pretty tough call between the Ridgeline and the Colorado, but because of my towing needs, I would probably get the gasoline Colorado Z71. I would skip the Zr2, I really like it, but again, the limited tow capacity that we find in that model would just be a little bit of a problem for me personally. Let me know what you would pick down there in the comment section below. Be sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. You can also click up there to go to patreon.com if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do. And of course, stay tuned for that Ford Ranger review, which hopefully we will have in the coming few months. I'll see you later.